If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedman.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today, my special guest is Viral Gor, also known as Virus the Poet. He's a celebrated Canadian poet and author. His best-selling collection, Poetry in Motion, Mind, Body, and Soul, earned international acclaim. Viral's captivating performances have graced stages in Paris, London, Toronto, New York, and many more places. His award-winning poem, Home, published by the Poetry Institute of Canada, highlights his distinguished career. Viral's work resonates globally, exploring themes that transcend cultural boundaries. Viral, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the show, and thank you for being this week's guest expert and mentor.
Thanks for having me, Susan. I really appreciate your time, and just having the opportunity to have a discussion with you about the book and my work is an honor to be here.
I'm in awe of poets, and you especially, because I just love how poets are able to tell a story, paint a picture in just a few words. Something that a nonfiction author like myself might take 1-2 pages to write, you can say in just a few lines. It just absolutely blows my mind.
I try to be as concise as possible because I want to get the message across in so little time, because especially, as you know, in today's world, the attention span is much shorter than it was before. You know, I have that in mind when I'm writing my pieces or want to articulate a message of some sort and say, hey, I want to give this in a digestible way where it's short, quick, and easy. Therefore, you can take that away and just let it marinate.
What inspired you to use poetry as your writing form of choice? I mean, it just seems very different,
Absolutely.
Especially for someone who's made it and is so successful, which is really hard for a poet. Kudos to you for doing this.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that because in my mind, I still don't think I've made it. But for me, poetry has always been a creative outlet. So I'm a big music lover, and I love all types of music, and hip hop and R&B and pop and jazz and instrumentals have always been something I gravitate towards. And so growing up in environments where I would listen to music like that, it just became an experience of creativity, an outlet. I used to draw as a child, and that evolved into poetry because I had a message to say. But, you know, poetry is a very vulnerable outlet. It's a very vulnerable art, right? You're putting your emotions for the world to see and absorb. And so that can be very nerve-wracking. So for me, I just want to be able to articulate my experiences or transforming pain or struggle into something powerful and beautiful for the audience to soak in. But also, a lot of the poetry that I write, it's not always about me. It could be about someone else or another experience or something that I've witnessed on the side of the highway or throughout my travels, just experiencing and observing things and people. And I found poetry provided a means to explore and communicate these feelings that were otherwise difficult to express. And sometimes people have told me that I'm glad I read this or, you know, I heard this poem because I was feeling this way and I didn't know how to articulate it. And you captured exactly, in essence, what I want to say. So I think it's an intimate thing for sure.
It is. It really is. And thinking about different poems that I've read over the years, it is. But how do you even start? You know, you get an idea, but where do you start in terms of putting the words together that it creates this, as you say, this vulnerability, but yet also very descriptive. I mean, I think that's also so beautiful in poetry, that you can be so descriptive in just so few words.
Right. What I learned early in my professional career was that if you want to send a message, you want to do it in a short and concise method where you're not drawing it out and just taking over a conversation. It's quick, it's easiest to the point. When I started to write poetry, I had to kind of evolve into this where I can send a message or make you feel a way in a short amount of time because I'm not trying to give you fluff or filler. I'm really trying to provoke thought in your mind by giving you an idea in your mind and let your mind paint the picture as I say the words. When I was doing shows, oftentimes I would say, close your eyes and open your ears because the idea was for you not to see me, but was to listen to the words that are being said so you can soak it up and find solace in the words. And I always want to give that the viewer, the listener, the watcher, the experience and impact of what a poem can do to them if they really reflect, absorb it. And so for me, I really start with either a word, an idea, an experience, or just an overwhelming emotion. And sometimes that's where it starts. Sometimes it just starts with the instrumental or a song that catches my attention. Even this conversation here, I might take this away and I might write a poem based on it because of how great the conversation is, right? So that's what it is for me. What is it for you when you're writing?
That's fascinating. And please, if you do that, make sure that you send it because we can read it over the air. It would be
Sure,
wonderful. It would
absolutely.
be such an honor. Yeah, I mean, again, the inspiration comes from an experience. It comes from, I think for me, it's been more of the experience
Yeah,
because sharing that and hoping that either a success or, something that didn't quite go the way it was planned is still a learning, not only for me, but for others that can learn
right,
from this too,
right.
which in terms of storytelling, I mean, that's the beauty. I mean, it isn't all fairies and princesses and,
Right, right.
once upon a
Exactly.
time and everything was, hunky
Exactly.
dory, which is a great segue into this whole idea of storytelling. I mean,
Sure.
because you are telling the story. Now,
Absolutely.
how do you make that story powerful? And you said close your eyes and just listen to
Yeah.
the words. But how can a nonfiction author like myself
Sure.
be able to add the impact and make a story powerful, and yet we're doing it in many more words than your talent of being
Yeah.
able to do it in so few words?
Yeah. That's a great question. So for me, it's authenticity and relatability. The overlying theme for poetry is motion, mind, body, and soul is relatability. At some point in your life, or the lives of those that you know, have gone through what I'm talking about in this book, or have experienced it in some way, shape, or fashion. For me, being authentic in what I'm trying to portray and making sure I have the conscious mind that I want someone to be able to relate to the piece I'm trying to share. I want some emotional connection. I want the emotional intensity to some degree. I want them to gain some insight and perspective into what I'm saying because you may not agree with the perspectives I paint, but if it opens up the dialogue to the conversation, then that's half my job, right? And so I think having that in mind, along with the artistic expression, just being able to be free enough to use language, rhythm, and metaphors to articulate poetry is why I do it. And I really want to be able to ensure that when people read, watch, or listen to my poems, is that they understand that they can feel the authenticity, they can feel the relatability, and most importantly, they can feel the emotion. And that's hopefully what's going to get them into their own mind, into their own psyche, into their own life, and kind of pull things apart and just reflect on where they went right, where they went wrong, what they could do different. Not to say in an overthinking fashion, but just in a way of if you want to be a better version of yourself and just get 1% better, then you have to kind of do these things. And it starts with reflection. And that's kind of what I started with when I started poetry.
So, reflection. Do you have a process where you map this out? I mean, is this strategic in terms of how you do it? Is there,
Mm,
like a pattern for, you starting with the reflection,
yeah.
then what?
Yeah, I think if you're looking from a structure standpoint, I don't really have one. It's just again, I let it free flow. But when I do sit down and write, I definitely start with, well, first of all, what's the subject? What am I trying to portray? What am I trying to showcase in this piece and why? I always want to go to what's the point? Why am I doing this? And that's where I start. And then it's just building blocks from there. It's like Lego, right? You have the first piece and you just add on. And sometimes and if you remember when you're younger or a child, playing with Legos, sometimes you didn't know what you were building. You were just going with the flow and building as you go and moving pieces from here and there. And sometimes you made a mistake and you move that piece around. And that's similar to how I put together my art.
Yeah, it's like the muse. I mean, it's
Yeah,
like something comes to you and you
exactly.
write. And I've read stuff that I've written and I was like, I don't even remember writing this.
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself, but there's times when I reread some of my old pieces, I'm like, oh, who wrote this? I don't remember being in this headspace or having this creative outlet to write things the way I do. So it's fun though in that way because it shows your growth and your evolution, right?
Yeah, I mean, that always fascinates me when that happens, that the muse comes in when you least expect it to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's been times when, I'll get an idea and I can write, three poems all in a span of 5, 10 minutes. But then there's other pieces that take me months or weeks because I'll start and I don't know where to go. I don't know how to end it, or I don't want to let it linger too long. I want to give it a good conclusion, but enough space for the reader, the watcher, or listener to take it away and let it relate to them. And it's a fine line, right? Because you're an author, so you can put more description in this piece of paper and on this page, but then you also think, well, is that too much description? Am I taking away from the story? And is the reader gonna get bored, or are they gonna, have ADD and do something else? So that's always something to think about in the back of my mind.
Oh, especially these days,
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
people's attention span is like a flea. I mean,
Yeah,
it's here
absolutely.
and here now and gone in a second.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
how about blending factual information with this storytelling to keep the attention,
Yeah.
especially both you're a speaker
Hmm.
and a writer? How do you do that? So many authors have factual information that they
Sure.
want to convey, but yet you want to make it interesting.
Yeah. For me, and that's a great question, I speak from a place of authenticity, which means I speak about my experiences, which for me are the facts, right? Because it's what I've experienced, what I've addressed, what I've gone through, or witnessing other people's experiences through our conversations and common threads and having an impact on narrative. I think it's important that when you're thinking about a story, you want to have a good blend of artistic integrity and facts. Because again, the reader, the watcher, the listener is going to listen with intent and they're trying to gain something out of it. So you want to empower them, you want to inspire them, but you also want to engage with them. And what do you do when you engage with someone? You give them facts that they can say, oh, yeah, I remember that, or that makes sense. Yeah, I can relate to this. Yeah, I've gone through something similar because, again, you're being as authentic as possible. Now, you don't want to put someone's personal business out there, right? So I think, again, it's a fine line of how much of the facts do you want to present? And for me in poetry, I want to do it in a way where it's entertaining, it's fun, it creates a dialogue. So what I do is I try to get feedback. And when I get feedback, I try to put that in the back of my mind that I want to foster this collective sense of belonging and support through storytelling with facts, but also metaphors that are fun and that you think you take it away and you're like, oh, never thought about it that way. That's interesting. Let me look into it more.
I think that's another thing that poets are brilliant at, and that is metaphors.
Mhm.
Being able to use a metaphor to convey what you want to convey. How do you come up with these metaphors? Is there a way that you, again, a technique?
Yeah, yeah, it's good. I don't have a structure in mind. It just kind of comes to you. When you're almost like you're painting a picture, right? Sometimes you're painting and you don't even know where the brush stroke goes and you just let it free flow in your mind and it kind of has a life of its own. And that's how poetry is written from my standpoint. Sometimes when you hone in on your craft, you can kind of do it with your eyes closed. And so the metaphors sometimes just spill out. But other times I have a poem called Planted and it's about individuals who are trying to plant themselves in their vision and having, a bright future. But I used the metaphor of a rose and the thorns as a way to illustrate life and the things you're going to go through, and planting your seed in the soil and watering it and using the sun to get some energy, because you can always relate things like that to your actual life if, again, you read between the lines. And that's why my tagline is, don't just listen to the lines, read between them.
Yes, planting, soils, flowers, blooming. I mean,
Right.
I love to use the bamboo metaphor that, you plant the seeds, but
Right. Right.
yeah, it can take up to 7 years before you see anything come through that
Absolutely.
soil. And for patience, because we're
Right.
very impatient, I think.
Very,
We
very
want
impatient.
we want success immediately.
Yeah, right away. And if you don't see it right away, you think of it yourself like, oh, I'm a failure, or I didn't achieve anything. When the reality is, like you said, it requires patience, right? When you want to grow a flower in your garden, you don't stop watering it for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and expect it to thrive. You're actually depriving it of what it needs to live. And so you can take that metaphor for your life, and what are you absorbing on a day-to-day basis to help you thrive and grow and achieve that success that you're looking for? Or are you just thinking you want that, but not putting in the quote unquote work to get there, right?
Yeah. What about some common pitfalls that writers should avoid to maintain this impact of story? What if you see these
Yeah,
mistakes, pitfalls, whatever you
sure.
want to call them?
Yeah. From a poetry standpoint, and I used to do this too, I used to think that every word or other word or every line had to rhyme with the previous one. And then later on, I evolved and I learned that it wasn't important about the rhyming, more so it was about the message and delivering it in a way where it's enticing and it makes you want to continue to read. The book purposely is only one poem per page because I didn't want to overwhelm the audience. For me, I wanted to make sure that it was digestible, it was short enough where you were not going to lose your attention, but it also didn't have to have the same flow and cadence in every single piece. I didn't want it to be you're reading it or you're watching, you're listening, and it sounds like the rest of them. For me, I think that happens a lot in the poetry world that I've been a part of, was that people think they have to rhyme in every word, or that they almost sound monotone to a certain degree, right? And when you're delivering any speech, whether it's at a conference, at a show, even at a book reading, you have to have some inflections in your voice, and you have to show the audience why they should be excited about a certain piece or a certain page or a certain paragraph or a scripture, right? You have to show and tell versus just expecting them to know, right? Expectations can be a fickle thing. When you are writing, whether it's a book or a story or a poem, it's important to remember what you're doing, why you're doing it, and that try to be as authentic as you can be for the reader, not yourself. And I think that's a big one. I used to write poetry for myself until I realized that I'm not sharing this with only myself. I'm sharing this with the world. When they read it, how are they going to portray it? How are they going to reflect on it? Because it can't always be about I, or me. It has to be about you. That was one of the pitfalls I learned early on, is that, I have to change the way I write my poetry so that the reader feels like it's about them and not the author fires the poet.
Yeah. And the word you is one of the 10 most powerful words in the English
Right,
language. So,
exactly.
yeah, you touched on a couple of things. The first is that for me, thinking about poetry, I always thought it's got to rhyme. And I think
Right,
that's one of the things that put me off. I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, how do I make this rhyme? And it put too much pressure on it. So
right,
I was
right.
like, I love the fact that you thought that as well. So, and
Absolutely.
wasn't the only one. So that makes me a whole lot, a lot better.
Absolutely. And I get a lot of those comments all the time when I talk to people and they're like, "Oh, you're a poet? Oh, I don't know anything about poetry. I don't understand it." I find that so funny because I think majority of people can find interest and relatability in it. It's just that it's not an everyday common art that you come across, or unless you're an avid poetry reader or listener. And so when you talk to people that they're living their life day to day and you share that with them, their first thought is exactly that. Oh, I'm thinking it always has to rhyme, and maybe that's not my vehicle of choice. Then I ask them the question. I say, okay, well, what are you into? What's your topic, subjects that you like? They'll list off a few, and I'll say, okay, well, that's in my book. I have stuff about life. I have stuff about reflection. I have stuff about love. I have stuff about struggles in your life. And so they're like, oh, okay. And I said, yeah, not all of them have to rhyme. At the end of the day, it's about a message that I'm trying to invoke in your mind and give you insight and try to provoke thought so that you can be better, right? So I talk about family, relationships, like I said, self-reflection, motivation, and experiences, because at the end of the day, this is what makes us human, and we're all having similar human experiences.
We really are.
Yeah,
Yes, our experiences are unique to us, but it doesn't mean that somebody else hasn't had a similar experience.
absolutely. Absolutely. I remember doing a show, and one of the pieces, I think it was about abortion, and it was about the male's perspective in an abortion. And it's a very obviously controversial subject, especially from a male's point of view. But then after I was done the performance, I got off stage and a guy came up to me and said, wow, I didn't realize that someone else had similar thoughts to what I thought. And, I caught the virus.
Hmm.
And so you never know what other people have experienced, right? Because you're not in their lives, you're in your own. When you're in your own world, it's like going through depression. In your world, when you're depressed, you think you're the only one depressed and you're having the worst time in the world, and no one else can relate to you because they have no idea. But you go maybe down the street or to the mall, and there's probably a dozen or so people that have experienced depression in one way, shape, or fashion that you don't even know, because one, you're not having those conversations, and two, really, it's none of your business. But also, it's the feeling of I'm not alone. And that's at the end of the day, at the crust of it, I think that's for me what drove me towards poetry, is that I want to make people feel that they're not alone in what they're going through, because I also know people that have gone through things that I've gone through and I didn't even realize until they told me. And so, I think that helps a lot.
And something else, a gift that you're giving people is you're giving them permission to talk about certain subjects, which could be very taboo in many
Right.
societies. So
Sure.
being able to help people do this, I think, is a real gift that you're giving them. Wonderful.
I appreciate
And
that.
something else that you said that I picked up on that I talk about a lot, and that is passion.
Yeah.
You talked about emphasizing and how you talk about things and the cadence and the pitch and everything that's involved. But at the end of the day, you've got to feel passionate about your work, whether it's a poem, whether it's a story, it's a book, it's whatever it is. Because if you're not passionate about it, why should somebody else be?
Right. That's a great point. Funny thing about passion, I used to get that all the time too when I was younger, and I would ask someone older than me or someone that's in a position that I would want to be in. I said, what should I do? How should I get there? And they would always tell me, oh, follow your passion. And I hated that because I was like, what does that even mean? Follow your passion. Now that I have the opportunity to speak on it, I think for me, passion is something you would do if money didn't exist, something that you enjoy doing, regardless if you make money out of it or not. People love to walk their dog. That's what they're passionate about. They want to go out, go into nature, spend time with their dog, and enjoy the sights and sounds with their companion. And that's what they're passionate about. So for me, I think that's really important, is to find your passion. But what that really means is find something that you love doing, whether you get paid for it or not, and will still continue to do, because it's something that's going to help you mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever have you, just something that you love doing.
And that's a wonderful segue into Viral. You telling us more about how our listeners can find out more about your work. What would you like to share with them?
Absolutely. So my book is called Poetry is Motion, Mind, Body, and Soul. You can buy it all major booksellers. You can request it if it's not on the shelves. The best place to get it is Amazon in all the major countries. You can get it at whatever, amazon.ca.com.uk. And you can follow me on at Virus the Poet on all social media platforms, as well as virusthepoet.com, which is my website. And if you're still not sold on buying the book, go to the website. There are over 100 pieces that you can just click on and read. see if you like it. And if you like it, go to Amazon or go to your nearest bookstore and pick up a copy of the book. You will not regret it. You can gift it to someone, a friend, a family, a companion. And at the end of the day, poetry is one of those things where it took me a long time to write, so I don't expect someone to open the book and read it right away and get through the 100 pages. It's one of those things where you take a piece, you read it, you soak it in, and you just let it marinate for a while. And at the end of the day, I want it to be for you and how you're going to take it in your life. And so I'll leave it at that.
Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, I'm going to put you on the spot, if you allow me. Is there a short poem that you'd be able to share with us?
Absolutely. This one's more thought-provoking. It's called Social Cast. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
How are we also connected, yet disconnected more than ever before? We have all been affected, whether you are conscious or not. This has gone above, beyond the top, the emotionless net. Yet, we are always preying, trying to see what others are doing. Unfortunately, all they're consuming are the social platforms that reveal the best of life, missing the realism of most lives. Stay woke as those conversations arise. Virus the poet.
Wow. That is so applicable to today's environment. Thank
Absolutely.
you. I would appreciate it if you could send that and so that I could put that in the show notes and make sure that we get it correct.
Yeah,
So that
absolutely.
would be lovely.
That's not a problem.
As you know, we always end with our guests sharing a golden nugget, their words of wisdom that they'd
Yeah.
like to leave our listeners. What are yours?
No, I think for me, it's find your most authentic self. A lot of times we go through life trying to find out how we're going to people please and how we're going to get through life by making others like us in a certain way. At the end of the day, I want you to walk away with this. Find your most authentic self. Start falling in love with yourself. Be your own best friend. Be your number one cheerleader. Be that person for yourself when you're down in the depths that you can talk to yourself and get yourself out of it. Not because you need to, but because you have to. Because sometimes, and a lot of times, you're going to go through things that only you will feel. Even if you have a significant other, you're feeling a certain emotion or you're feeling a type of way about something that happened to you, you're the one that's going to have to deal with it internally. And so I think my message is to be self-reliant and resilient. And I think that will go a long way.
Very much so, because if we can't do it for ourselves, we can't rely on others to be
Right.
there to do it for us. So,
Exactly.
yeah, we have to
Yeah.
be able to do it for ourselves. And I always say it's like one of those blow up bouncy dolls that you can push down and it will bounce back up again.
Right.
And
Right.
that's how you have to be because you are going to get knocked down, but
Absolutely.
doesn't mean you have to stay there.
Yeah. And don't beat yourself up if it takes you longer than you even would like, right? Sometimes you go through things and it keeps you down for a couple of weeks, sometimes a couple months, sometimes a couple of years. But ultimately, it's like anything. You get up, once you get knocked down, brush off your shoulders and keep trying. Because ultimately in life, who is ever going to knock you for trying anything, you know? And that's the number one thing is to try.
Yeah. Yes. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. This has been amazing, very touching. And just as you said, that authenticity,
Yeah.
that feeling, I think that really came out in everything that you shared with us. So really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And listeners, if your book isn't selling the way you wanted or expected to, let's you and I jump on a quick call together to brainstorm ways to ramp up those sales because you've invested a whole lot of time, money, and energy, and it's time you got the return that you were hoping for. Go to bookmarketingbrainstorm.com to schedule your free call. And in the meantime, I hope this powerful interview sparks some ideas you can use to sell more books. Until next week, here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.